All right, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for coming to the PRSA chapter webinar series. We have a number of chapters that are joining us, and we'll wait as people enter the room. But I know we have our partners in PRSA in Kansas City, Springfield, Missouri, Nebraska, Southeast Wisconsin, and we have a number of other chapters that are joining us on this journey. This is the 21st webinar we've done in 22 weeks, so it's pretty amazing that we have some really awesome speakers that have come to the table to help really promote PRSA, our members, the policies and procedures, as well as issues that are really come to light every single week for us as PR professionals. Today, obviously, we're talking about from statements to action to anti-racism, the communicator's role. What is your role? We have all crafted those statements. And with racism being front and center in many of the facets of our lives these days, we're very honored to have with us Shanika Finn, who's the chair of the Central Ohio Public Relations Society of America, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. She's also the owner of Precise One Marketing. We have with us Gail Saunders, who's APR, former Central Ohio Public Relations Society of America, Diversity and Inclusion Committee member, and she's the co-founder of that D&I committee. She's also the founder and CEO of Saunders Company. And we have with us Jaron Terry, who's the Central Ohio Chapter D&I committee member and president of Jaron Terry Communications. So I'm going to turn it right over to you for your intros. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for having us. We are excited to participate and have this conversation today, and to be able to interact and have this discussion, because it's very much needed in our communities. Obviously, with everything going on in our communities, we have so many issues with regard to racism. So we have Black Lives Matters, we have protests that are going on, we have police brutality, we have a lot of different issues not going on just on a local level, but on a national level. So we are glad to be able to have this conversation about this issue. Now, before we go into that, we definitely want to let everyone know a little bit about us and why we are actually wanting to talk about this issue. So let's first start out just to talk about why this is even important to you. With today's climate, why is this conversation important to you? Why don't we start with Gail?
Well, thank you so much, Shanika, and good afternoon, everyone. It is certainly an honor to be with you today. Very excited that you've joined the conversation and thankful that we've been invited to participate. So the question is, why is this personal to me? Well, as Shanika said, the setup, the social justice concerns that have been heightened over the last couple of months certainly is a big issue for us. But for me, when I think about our role as communicators, there's such a lack of diversity at the table when we come to corporate America and other entities that are making huge decisions and are driving communications across the organization. That's a big issue and concern for me, and so that's a personal matter. And when you think about all of the issues that we've had in corporate America, from Gucci to Prada to Burberry, and that's just the fashion industry. When we talk about corporate America and the statements they've been making recently on anti-racism, but not really putting together any meat behind those. And then, of course, I am a Black woman in America. And my entire career, my life, my childhood, I've experienced various subtle things and not so subtle that really get to the core of racism. This is personal. It means a lot to me. And as a leader in communications, it is absolutely critical that we play a role in helping to shape the narrative and the dialogue and the change. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jaron.
Thank you, Gail. So I too am really excited to be here today with my two wonderful colleagues. I have been in PRSA for 40 years now, and have my own business and teach crisis communications at Franklin University, and have been serving on the D&I committee, which Gail and I co-founded in 2015. I think the task force started. and working in the last, 4 years with Shanika as chair of that committee. It's been wonderful. So why is it personal to me to be here today talking about racism? So I have, in my own life, I've been at the bedside when some family members have passed on. So being present when someone dies has not been a new thing. But what was new is when I personally witnessed George Floyd being murdered and dying on television right before my eyes. Obviously, I wasn't the only person who was massively affected by seeing that. And, you know, we saw all of the Black Lives Matter protesters reminding everyone that police brutality is a reality and that indeed Black lives matter. We also saw statements from all organizations up and down the ladder, and many of us as public relations professionals were involved in crafting those statements on behalf of our clients or the organizations for which we work. I don't know about you, but in more than a few cases, I felt like I had to push back a little bit and say, where you say this part, is that really true? Because, you know, honesty is part of the code of ethics for PRSA as a practitioner. But all of the statements that were made, how do we turn those into reality? That's what we're talking about here today. And so for me, all of this caused me to want to take a deeper look at myself personally and realize that, oh my gosh, I went to an all-white school. My parents sent me to parochial school. There were 60 kids in my class, and just kind of wondering why for a family where there was one breadwinner, my dad was a radio news announcer who probably didn't make a whole lot of money. My mother worked at home, as we now call the housewife and mother role. Why would they scrape up enough money to send my sister and I to an all-white parochial school? And, you know, just looking at the calendar, 1954 was the landmark Supreme Court civil rights case, Brown versus the Board of Education, which was integration of the school systems. And I started school in 1957. And so what was happening in Columbus, Ohio at that time was busing. And so looking at what, you know, the environment I grew up in, all white school, and my high school was slightly integrated. Went to college, all white, PRSSA member, all white. And now here I am in PRSA and looking at the leadership, and I think we can all agree we do have a dearth of diversity at the highest levels, which, as you know, PRSA is working on. But all of that to say that I wanted to take a deeper look, and so here I am helping my white colleagues to take a deeper look as well.
Well, thank you, Jaren. So glad that white colleagues are actually being actively involved with this issue. Just to let you know a little bit about myself and why this is so important to me, why we're having this conversation. I've been in public relations and marketing for over 20 years, and a part of PRSA since 2014, chair since 2016. I absolutely love our organization, and I love what it is that we are doing. Communications directly impacts every aspect of our careers. So with all of the issues going on with racism, our careers are directly related to what we do and how we help companies with regard to this issue. But for me, on a personal level, I have a lot of feelings when it comes to dealing with racism. And for me, I was raised actually in a white township. So my school was majority white. All of my friends were white. You know, they used to always say, well, you're the only Black person I know who listens to heavy metal. You're the only Black headbanger I know. Well, I still like heavy metal to this day, but you also are a product of your environment with regard to your the things that you like, things that you do. When you are the only Black, though, you don't even realize the racism that's going on around you. When I became a little bit older and entered into college and started really realizing, being around a lot of people, the melting pot of the United States, right? You become an adult and you're around a lot more people. Then I became a part of being around more Black people and started noticing the things that I was hearing in high school and when I was a child was racism. And I just didn't even know. And I actually began to get really irritated and frustrated and actually angry at my experiences of, oh, well, you know, Shanika's okay. She doesn't talk like that. She's not like that. Little things like that when you don't even realize that that is racism. So that really, really got to me when I got to college. And then when I started seeing the world as it is, the murders that are going on with regard to Black people, especially by police officers, the suppression of economic development for Black people, and the fact that all of that has spurred protests and so forth. But it really comes down to systemic racism being one of the biggest issues. That's why all of these protests are going on. Black Lives Matter and the police brutality, all of it stems from systemic racism. And also what gets to me is the unfair treatment, the lack of accountability for police officers and the murders that they are doing and not having to be accountable for it. And these are people's lives. These are Black people's lives. And along with that, implicit bias, and which is what I will talk about a little bit later, that is a really important issue for me only because every single person has implicit biases. Everyone does. But when it comes to implicit bias, with relation to racism, it's on a completely different level. I was privy to a conversation where we were talking about racism, or they were talking about racism, and a man had said, well, you don't pick cotton and I don't have slaves. Now that kind of comment right there was already an issue for me because it was very, very clear that he did not understand that whites have greater access to power. They have greater access to resources. And with all of that, that is my daily reality. That is Gail's daily reality. That is my brother, my cousin's daily reality, living with these issues. And something as simple and minor, and I'm saying minor because it should be obvious to everyone, but unfortunately it's not. Implicit bias impacts every single aspect of our lives within business and on a personal level, on a social level. So those are the reasons why it's so important to me and why we're having this conversation. But Gail, why don't we talk a little bit about inclusion from the executive level to the front line so we can start talking about this issue with regard to business in our workplace?
Absolutely, Shanika. And I just want to piggyback on what you said. Implicit bias is every day. I'm going to take that a step further. Racism, systemic racism, is in everything we do. We may not recognize it, but from the laws of the land to the HR policies in our organizations in corporate America, systemic racism is real, and it impacts everything we do. And so I want to talk to you about how that shows up in corporate America, but most importantly, our role as communication leaders in helping to address that and having the courage to step up and speak up and make shifts in the roles that we play to make a difference. So I know you've heard this, diversity and inclusion. You can't have diversity without inclusion. It really doesn't matter. If you have diversity, that's good, but you've got to have inclusion as well. And so that's what makes it work. And so when we talk about corporate America and the business reasons for having diversity and inclusion, it really does impact the bottom line. And it really is a business imperative. So I'm going to share a couple of slides with you to give you some context around that business imperative and the business case for diversity, inclusion, and equity. So I'm going to share my screen, and I want to make sure that you can see this first slide. Now, let me tell you that this is recent information from Deloitte study, and they've done a recent article that really does take a look at how companies show up when the individual leaders are committed to diversity and inclusion and equity. And so when you talk about leaders who are focused on creating a culture that supports diversity, inclusion, and equity, and allows everyone who is at the table to feel comfortable speaking and sharing their voice, to feel comfortable identifying some gaps when it comes to diversity issues, to identifying gaps when it comes to looking at the people around the table and recognizing that there's no person of color, no person of no LGBTQ person at the table, in addition to all the diversity of thought, because oftentimes corporations say, well, we have diversity of thought. We've got to have that. But you have to be very intentional about the types of diversity that you bring to the table. So if you're looking around and you don't see people who don't look like you at the table, it is our responsibility to make sure that that happens. So when you talk about individual feelings of inclusion, when employees feel that they have a sense of fairness, respect, are valued and belonging, and psychological safety. I want to talk about that. Shanika talked about her experience growing up and then waking up in college to what she did not recognize were racist comments and interactions. That psychological safety is very critical for allowing people to feel free to be who they are. And then, of course, inspiration. We all know as communicators and writers and leaders that we need inspiration to be able to do our job to the fullest that we can. And so when you surround and create a culture that is inclusive, 70% of your employees are going to feel more engaged, and they're going to produce a higher quality of product. And when you talk about team performance, when it comes to a leader and leadership who is very deliberate about inclusion, diversity, and equity, you get a 17% increase in team performance. And then, of course, when you talk about decision-making and the best quality of decision-making, how we are taking a product to the market, whatever that product is, you get a 20% increase in decision-making quality, and that matters. And then team collaboration. We all know that that things are better and products are better when we are collaborative. And so you get a 29% increase in team collaboration. That matters to the bottom line. And so when we talk about the bottom line, this same study, and you can see what it talks about targets for your financial bottom line. Corporations and organizations who are committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity, and who create a culture of inclusion and equity, they are as likely to meet or exceed financial targets by 2 times as much as those companies that don't. When you talk about, you know, we all have this in our corporations. I used to be at Nationwide leading communications there, and we talked about high-performing teams and a high-performing organization. You're 3 times more likely to be high-performing. The innovation matters. Things are changing every day when it comes to innovation in technology, in products, in services, in how we engage with one another. You're 6 times more likely to have an innovative and an agile team to meet the demands of today. And then we talked about the financial targets. We're talking about business outcomes. 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. So if you think about, and when you consider the business imperative for having a diverse workforce, a workforce that feels that it is included, and an equity workforce. If you want to talk about why this matters, use the business model, the financial targets, the business outcomes to your leadership. And so, as a corporate communications leader, everyone who's on this call, we all play that role. It is our responsibility to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable and our leaders accountable when it comes to these things. I'm going to give you an example. As I mentioned, whether it was Nationwide, Ohio State, any of those entities that I've led corporate communications teams, oftentimes early on in those leadership roles, as I'm looking to hire communications professionals, I've gotten feedback from my HR team that says, oh, I can't find any qualified diverse candidates. And so the question becomes, first of all, we know that there are qualified candidates in every single career that is in the universe. And so the question becomes, where are you looking? Where are you seeking to reach and to get qualified candidates? Our responsibility, and we have some tools for you in our handout, is to say, well, let me help you find organizations, identify organizations that can help you with a pool of diverse talent. Don't take it from HR that you can't find diverse candidates. Don't let that be something that stops you as a communicator. Push the envelope and send them to, do not accept the talent pool that they give you if it's not diverse. Make them go back to the table, which is what I've done. And you always get a better pool of candidates when your pool is diverse. And let's quit hiding behind, well, I'm all for diversity, but I want to make sure this qualified. That within itself is a racist statement. So we need to make sure that we understand that that within itself is a racist statement. So that's a role that we play. And then as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about our role as communicators at the table, Jaren mentioned it early. In our role, we're writing statements for our leaders. We are driving communications campaigns for our leaders and for our corporations. We are working with the marketing team to develop marketing products, videos, social media platforms, creative, as a part of our role as communications leaders. We have to hold all of those teams accountable for making sure that those products look like the culture that we're trying to achieve. They look like the diversity that is these Americas. And so it's our responsibility to reject those things that do not reflect that and push the envelope to make sure that they do. And when we do that, it's tough. We get labeled. I know that has happened over the course of my career, but those labels are just that, labels. I take it as a badge of honor because it means that I'm doing something to change the system. And so, as Jaren said, it takes all of us, those who are people of color, those who are of the LGBTQAI community, and those who are not, to be in this together to help impact and move change. And I'm going to pause there. I think my time might be up, Shanika. So I'm going to pause there because I want to make sure that we have time for questions at the end. But I hope that, and we have these tools for you in our handout, some of the references that I made, but very powerful information. Just stand behind the bottom line when you're talking to your leadership. That's what moves leaders, is when it impacts the bottom line. And so with that, Jaren, I am turning it over to you, I do believe, Shanika, is that correct?
Well, actually, no, let's talk a little bit about implicit bias first, and then we'll go right into anti-racism.
Thank you, Shanika.
Of course. Yes, we've mentioned implicit bias several different times in this conversation, and it's important that we increase awareness and make people understand, help people understand the importance of implicit bias, what it is, and how it impacts them, not simply on a personal level, but especially on a professional level, because it impacts or it's related to the systemic racism that goes on today. And with implicit bias, of course, we all know that it's a, it's a belief, it's a prejudice against a group of people based on their identity. So right now we're talking about race, and implicit biases, unconscious biases, again, we all have them. It may not pertain to race, but every single person in this world has them. I saw a comment in chat where someone had mentioned the vice president debate last night, which I'm sure many of us, we were all watching, where a candidate did say that they denied that implicit bias even exists. Completely not true. Every single person has an implicit bias. It may not necessarily deal with race, it may be in another area, but every single one of us has it. So it's something that cannot be denied. But I'm going to show you, I'm going to share a screen with you. I'm going to show you all a picture. Now, okay, so you see 3 rows of people. I'm not going to ask anyone questions about this picture. What I would like for you to do is just simply look at the picture. Look at the people individually. When you see these people, all of them, and then you hone in on an individual, do you find yourself feeling uncomfortable if you see one picture over another? Do you feel yourself tense up on the inside, something that you may not admit on the outside? And it's okay. Again, we're not going to ask any questions. It's just, this is an opportunity for you to be able to see the different types of people, because we have a melting pot, right? This is the United States. We are a melting pot, but we have different people. When you see different people and you find that you get a different reaction, you feel a different way, you may feel a little bit uncomfortable, or you may see, for instance, a Black man with a hood. How do you feel when you see that picture? If you go to the next row, the middle row to the left, the very first man is a white man with a hood. Do you have the same feeling when you see that picture versus the Black man with the hood? If you do have the same feeling, okay. If you don't have the same feeling, you might want to think about, why do you have that feeling? Why do you think differently? All of it stems from implicit biases. All of it stems from unconscious biases. It's something that's taught when we are young and we don't even realize it. We are taught that from our households. We are taught that in society. We are taught that in the schools and elementary schools. It's been ingrained in us. We're not born this way. We've learned to be this way. And because we have learned to be this way, that is actually what's causing you to have a different thought or a different feeling or a different perception about people. So let me stop sharing this screen with you guys so we can continue this conversation. But I showed you all that picture so that you can get a better understanding of implicit bias and think about where it comes from, again, because it is learned. And one of the things you might want to do with regard to race or any other issue that you may have implicit biases is, again, ask yourself questions such as, why am I feeling this way? Where did it come from? You will, once you start peeling back the layers, you will realize that it is something that was learned, you learned as a child. Hence, it's something that can actually be changed. So understanding that, and then also recognizing that when you have unconscious biases, it impacts every decision you make on a social level, a professional level, in the workplace. That's where systemic racism comes from. Everything stems from your unconscious biases. They impact the decisions that you make, the policies that you make. When you are at the table, if you are a leader in communications and you are at the table with the executives, the decisions that you make and the discussions that you have are all impacted by your implicit biases. So once you become aware of the fact that you do have them, think about where they came from, why you have them, and then address that or confront it. I gave the example earlier of the Black man with the hood. If by chance you're uncomfortable, if you're walking in the street by yourself and it's in the evening or nighttime and you find a Black man with a hood walking towards you, you may feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, recognize that that's still a human being just like you. And you can confront that issue of thinking, why am I uncomfortable just because he's wearing a hood? White people wear hoods too. And address it. You might turn around and just look at the person and smile and say hello to him. You'd be surprised at how many Black men with hoods on will carry on conversations with you and are just as friendly as you are. But that is a way to be able to confront your own implicit biases. You also might want to take a look at your own circle of influence. What I mean when I say that is, think about, who do you go shopping with? Who do you go to the movies with? Who's your best friends in college? Who are your best friends today? Do the people that you hang around with, and even people you do business with, and your doctors, your dentists, do they look like you? If they all look like you, then you might want to take a look at that and think about why. Do you feel more comfortable with people like you? Of course you do. Most everyone does. But we are a melting pot and we are all different. And you may have some implicit biases underneath that you're not aware of. So confront that. Think about where it came from. Be conscious of it and go confront that. You can do that by befriending people who are not like you, especially in the workplace, because implicit bias impacts the decisions that you make and all of the policies that's going on in the workplace. Start talking to people who are different than you. Invite them to coffee, or when you get together after work, are all of your colleagues just like you? Start inviting other people who look different from you, because you would be amazed at not only the great conversations that you can have with people who are different from you, but what you can learn from them. And that too, those discussions and those friendships that you're developing, that too will also help you be a little bit more aware of the unconscious biases that you have. So I'm going to quickly move forth with this, but please understand the importance of implicit bias, unconscious biases, and understand that we all have them and they impact every single decision that you make. So when you are at work and you are at the table and you are having conversations, whether it be with executives, whether it be your own team, or even if it's simply for your own personal life, you need to start looking at your own circles, the conversations that you're having, who you're having those conversations with, and understand that it does impact every decision that you make. Okay? I'm going to share another picture with you. Okay. And while I am sharing this, just to let you know that you may have heard of white privilege, which is also impacted by implicit bias. And I'm going to be very frank when I say this. White privilege is actually shared by all white people. That is not an opinion, that is an actual fact. White privilege is basically where you're more likely, white people are more likely to have benefits. And it could be benefits to home ownerships. It could be benefits to the quality of education that they have. It could be inheritances from past generations within a family. Basically, white privilege impacts implicit biases. And all white people have them. And you will find sometimes that white people, unfortunately, will be a little defensive, and it's probably because they aren't aware of really what it means. You might hear someone say, well, I'm not privileged. I wasn't raised with an excess amount of income. We weren't rich. I had to work for every dollar that I had. So therefore, I'm not privileged. That's not really what white privilege refers to. White privilege is actually, again, referring to the fact that it's shared by all white people, and you're more likely to have privileges and benefits over Black people. We do not have those same privileges. So that's something to make sure that you're aware of. But I'm sharing a screen, and hopefully everyone can see it, 4 levels of oppression and change. There are 4 levels that we all deal with on a regular basis. And these are areas where you can actually help make change, to understand the oppression that actually goes on and how you can actually make a change in your daily life, especially when you're at work. But we have here our first level of oppression, which is the personal. Now you have a personal oppression, which basically deals with the values that you have, the beliefs that you have, the feelings that you have about people who are different from you, okay? And that can come from within your family, from your childhood, the people that you're interacting with, but it's all on a personal level, okay? Then you have the second level of oppression. And in the second level of oppression, you can see that deals with most everything deals with what you do at work, the policies that are going on, and also in society. What rules are we living by? What rules are we playing by? What do we all practice in the procedures that we carry out? Okay. And the third levels, we have institutional racism, which we've mentioned this several times. The rules, the policies, the procedures, all of the things that impact us on a daily basis at work. And I'm sorry, let me clarify a little bit with interpersonal, with interpersonal oppression. Those are your actions and your behaviors and the languages that you use in your dealings with different people that you deal with on a regular basis. Institutional racism is the rules and the policies and the procedures and the practices. And that's what you're dealing with on a regular basis when you are at work and you are carrying out your roles as communications professionals. And then we have the fourth level of oppression, which is cultural. And of course, that is what you're dealing with every day, no matter where you are. That is the standard of our beauty, the standard of truth that we're living with. What do we consider normal? What do we consider right? What is right? If you think about the levels of oppression, especially when it comes to the cultural aspect, what is right is basically, it stems from what's right for white people, not people who are Black or brown. Our world is actually based on white privilege and the fact that, and we're not saying you as an individual, we are talking about as a race. That is what our world is based on, and hence that's what makes Black and brown people oppressed. So those are areas of oppression to make you aware of them, and then an opportunity for you to be able to make change when you are at the workplace. Let me stop sharing this screen so we can all look at each other. We all have the opportunity to be able to make a difference, recognize our own implicit biases, understand the levels of oppression and how you can make a change and impact them in your daily life at work, in your personal life as well. There's a resource sheet that everyone will be receiving, and I would highly recommend, yes, Jaron just showed us, I would highly recommend when you look at that, you might want to take a look at the video on YouTube that is on that sheet. It's 5 things to know about racism. The woman, Francesca, goodness gracious, what's her last name? Francesca Ramsey. Right, Ramsey. So, thank you. So watch her video. She really gives you a lot of basic information when it comes to racism, and it gives you a different perspective on a very casual level. So no one's preaching at you. She's actually kind of funny. So you may giggle a little bit, and that's good because you want to be relaxed when you're dealing with this issue. But I would recommend that you take a look at that because that will give you some very basics. So we want to make sure that we move this along so that way we can get to action, and from that action, getting to anti-racism. So I'd like for Jaron, if you could continue with this conversation, please.
Thank you, Shanika. I will, and I will say that I did watch Miss Ramsey's video, and it was a lot of fun, but did make me a little uncomfortable. So talking about being uncomfortable, when our D&I chapter first started talking about implicit bias, and we put together a program that was delivered to our board first, and then we delivered it to the East Central District rally to all the leaders from the chapters in East Central District. It really made me want to, again, take that deeper dive, because in working on diversity and inclusion in my workplace and in the organizations of which I'm a member, and then hearing about implicit bias, it's like I really wanted to learn more. And I saw that the author, Robin DiAngelo, who is the author of White Fragility, was coming to Columbus, Ohio at one of the libraries. And so I signed up for it. And then I found out that Robin's a white woman. And I thought, what can white people teach me about white fragility and anti-racism? And so I didn't go to it. But then George Floyd was murdered, and it was time to learn everything I could from every source possible. And so when I saw an opinion piece in the Washington Post by Jonathan Capehart, who's one of the media people that I follow and greatly respect, his piece was called, Dear White People, Please Read White Fragility. And so I did. And I learned so much about white privilege, which, as Shanika said, we as white people, it's just part of what, comes with the package. It's the benefit of the doubt. It's when I was in the Caribbean and my husband passed a counterfeit $10 bill at the straw market. We didn't know it was counterfeit. And, what flashed through my mind is, oh my God, we're going to be imprisoned in a foreign country. What's going to happen to our teenage son who was with us? Well, you know what? Nothing happened. The woman selling the bauble we were buying, just like, well, do you have another one? That doesn't happen for everyone. That was our white privilege. Another book that, and that book, by the way, is on our reading list. And Gail Saunders had actually recommended that we all look at 13th, the documentary by Ava DuVernay. That is also on the resources list. That will teach you more about what is meant by systemic racism in terms of it being kind of baked into the DNA of our country. And I think that we all need to understand that level before we can take a deeper dive personally and help our organizations and our country, in fact, move forward. So another book that I highly recommend is Ibram Kendi, which is How to Be an Anti-Racist. And so his main thesis is that there's really no such thing as saying, I'm not a racist, because that's what a lot of us say a lot of time, I'm not a racist. But what he says is you can't say that anymore. That's in the middle. You are either a racist or you are actively working toward anti-racism. So if you're not doing the things to teach yourself to confront your organizations and the businesses that you work with on moving toward anti-racism action that will get you there, then in fact, the other side might apply. So our chapter came up with, I'm going to do screen sharing here, 8 steps for moving, whoops, there's the share button. So 8 actions to encourage anti-racism from executives to the front line. And this is adapted from a letter from the Queer Partnership for Black Liberation, which is an organization here in Columbus, Ohio. So the first step is to understand the difference between racist and anti-racist, as I just spelled out that Kendi will teach you. Understand what white privilege is and use it in support of anti-racism and accept the consequences for doing so. So understanding that just being white gives you the benefit of the doubt, moves your resume to the top of the pile, the networks that you've developed over time because of going to an all-white school, all of those things we talked about, give you that white privilege. It isn't anything you can get rid of either, but you can use it to support anti-racism and move other people forward. Recognize how the habits of white supremacy and systemic racism go hand in hand. Now that term white supremacy, we've certainly heard that a lot lately. particularly in the political arena, about what it means to be a white supremacist. And, you know, I have here that that's not white nationalism. Those two things are very closely linked. White nationalism is what we saw in Charlottesville with the torches and the people dressed in the golfing outfit, or in the khakis and the white shirt. White supremacy is just a state of mind that you automatically assume that a white person or the white race is better than all the other races. And that really does go hand in hand with the systemic racism that we've been talking about. So you can also listen to Black people and believe what they are saying. So, you know, you might think, well, you know, like Shanika said, growing up in an all-white school, well, there's no, you know, no racism here. But when a person of color tells you about their experience and what they perceived to be anti-racist toward them, number one, believe it. Listen to what they're saying. Don't ever tell someone their personal experience is not valid. Identify the Black-led organizations and movements to follow. Invest in Black-owned businesses and initiatives, and pitch and purchase ads in Black-owned media. And there's a whole list of the Black-owned media that you can pitch to. You know, we all have our media lists and our regular go-to people with whom we've developed relationships. Move that, make that circle wider, and really reach out to those. You know, you've got your PRSA lunches, etc. Find out what are some of the Black organizations in your town that might be having programs that you could support simply by your presence. Celebrate Black leaders and Black members of your organization, and put Black coworkers forward to participate on committees, projects, and promotions. And if you look around your organization and you see that really the only people here who are of color are those who don't have positions with any authority or responsibility, that's something you might want to bring up to HR or to your team leader and start making some changes there. And I'll go back to that one just real quickly. We talk about diversity and inclusion. Diversity is getting an invitation to the dance, but inclusion is being invited to dance. So in other words, you don't want an invitation to the dance if you're just going to sit there like a wallflower. And same thing, you don't want to be a, quote, diversity hire, checking the box at an organization, and you pretty much sit in your office because all of the plum jobs and projects are populated by people who don't look like you. And also get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's not comfortable to talk about implicit bias, unconscious bias, because it is the truth. As Shanika said, we all have it. And if we are not willing to look at it, we can't do anything about it. So just get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and finally do the work. And I will say that by your being present here today, you're already doing the work. One of the other things on our resource sheet, which I believe Chris will be distributing to everyone who attended afterwards, is we've got 5 tips to create inclusive campaigns. I'm not going to read through these, but they're on the resource sheet as well. And then finally, to continue the work, you're invited to come to our webinar. Well, it would have been a luncheon had we been able to sit there together, but this is going to be on October 15th at noon Eastern time. And just go to prsacentralohio.org if you'd like to come, and to get the member rate, the chapter member rate, which I think is only $10. I wish it were free, but we're not perhaps as far along as you are here in the Midwest. PRSA diversity, and that will get you there for free. So I'll throw that back to Shanika or Chris I think it looks like we have some more chat questions. It's time for questions, right, Shanika?
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you so much for giving these amazing lessons. And as we're, I guess, moving forward and trying to change things, not only within PRSA, but other organizations across the country. I mean, this morning on CBS National News, they mentioned the fact that on the 9th floor of the FBI, the leadership of the FBI, there is no African-American presence on that floor. And so there's a deeper investigation going on. There's a lot more out there that we have to really step up and make a difference. And as PR leaders in this country, we have to really go out there and get more individuals involved, not only in our industry, but changing those decision makers' views on getting more inclusive and bringing more people to the table. So I definitely want to thank you. And I want to start by asking, if anybody is interested in asking a question, please put your name in the chat feature, because I'd like to make you able to speak or to make you live so we can have you ask your question live. So if you'd like to just put your name in the chat feature, we'll make you live here in a minute to ask a question.
And Chris, I'll just jump in. When we presented this for our chapter, one of the questions that came back was, how can a company, beyond the statement and without looking performative, indicate that they are moving along toward anti-racism? And I thought Gail had a really good answer for that with some of the case studies that you mentioned. So since we don't have a question, I'll throw that one out.
Thank you, Jaren. I'm going to respond with something that The Ohio State University has done here, many examples across the country, but made a statement, and the CEO of the medical center actually put his team to work to go beyond that statement. And so they have created a series of committees that have identified measurable outcomes, working with the student body, the faculty, the partners in the community, looking at studies that have been done and completed by Franklin County, the poverty study and other studies, and really putting a deliberate, intentional action, anti-racism action agenda together to help drive change. And there are accountability measures for the departments, for his leadership team in each of those. And so we know as communicators, and we hear it all the time, if you don't measure it, it doesn't count. We have to measure our work. They have put clear and are continuing to put clear measures in those outcomes. And so that's the way to do it. Put in real deliberate action plans, talk to people across the board, get them involved to participate in being part of the change, and then make sure that there are measurable actions and hold people accountable. So there's a check-in every quarter by this. And so that is one example of how to do that. If I may add one other thing, and that is we talk about our role. And so many of us are in leadership roles in our companies or within PRSA. We often talk about mentorship and the importance of mentorship, and that is absolutely critical. But we know there's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And so when we talk about mentorship, yes, you're helping people, you're giving them information, you might be exposing them to different opportunities. But sponsorship is all of that, and speaking up for that individual, making sure that that individual gets those prime projects, making sure that when I am at the table with someone who I am mentoring and sponsoring, I give them an opportunity to shine. And so each of us on this call can do that no matter where we are. And so those are just two real examples. And I'll pause there because I know others have other things to share too. So.
Well, and we do have a question here in the Q&A, which I guess is separate from the chat. So I don't know who wants to take it, but I'll read it here. How can an employee who's not in leadership call out or question the hiring practices that appear to lack diversity without being part of those hiring practices? So if you're not a leadership position, how do you hold your company to the fire?
Can I jump in with that one? One of the basic things that anyone and everyone, and it doesn't matter what role you have in a company or organization, is to ask questions. You can ask questions to your direct supervisor, who can then talk to their direct supervisor, and it goes up the chain to the executive management. If you are a part of executive management, then you could simply ask your colleague questions directly, but that is the very basics. So I'm going to leave it at that because I know that we're limited on time, but start there because any and everyone has the ability to be able to ask questions, to spark conversation and make people aware, not by pointing fingers and saying what you don't see, but rather asking questions so that they can be open to what you're saying and receiving it and start to understand and see it on their own. That's the very basic first step.
So a few weeks ago, we had a symposium called Racism in America and Why We're Not Okay. And one of the questions was brought out by a senior member of a Fortune 50 company who asked the questions, how do you make this an issue with senior management when they don't see it as an issue?
You know, since the question was given to us anonymously, you could actually try to, I mean, if you're, definitely not at the leadership level, do it anonymously. So when you come across an article like about how Starbucks told their employees they can't wear Black Lives Matter shirts, and then that was very quickly flipped, just clip that article and or print it out and put it in an envelope and send it anonymously. Just let your leadership know, hey, look how another company got it wrong. And I'm glad that our company is working to get it right, I assume. Just bring it to their attention. Of course, they might say, well, there's no such thing as implicit bias.
And I think that goes to courageous leadership. And when I say leadership, I'm not speaking of leadership from a position or title position, leadership within ourselves. It goes to courageous leadership. Sometimes we have to speak up. That's the only way it's going to change. I'll tell you this, the first time it's going to be uncomfortable. The second time it's going to be uncomfortable. The third time it might feel a little better. The fourth time, the fifth time, you've got to keep doing it. You don't, and as Shanika said, do it in a way that is professional, that you're not you're not being accusatory. You're just asking the question, have you considered this? Have we thought about another way to do this? Can I introduce you to someone who might help you understand this a little better? We've got to, it is our responsibility because we're in this communications role to be the voice,
Can I add to that as well, Jaren, because that is so true. You do have to speak up, and please allow me to be able to say, when you don't speak up, you are actively being silent. Now, whether it be you see racism going on, or whether it be you want to speak up and make it an issue within your own company so that way there can be change that is made, please understand that when you don't speak up, you are committing to silence. And committing to silence is the exact same thing as acting as a racist. And you may not see that, but it is in fact the case. So you don't want to commit to silence. You do want to have the courage to be able to say something, because otherwise all you're doing is contributing to the racism, especially the systemic racism that's going on in the workplace.
And if you don't want to be seen as a troublemaker, maybe be seen as a good troublemaker, as the late
Yes.
Senator Lewis would say.
Get good trouble. Yep.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, I want to thank you for presenting to us today. This was enlightening on many different levels. And I know that we can only aspire to be as amazing as you guys are in Ohio with your D&I committee. Hopefully, our local chapters can somehow pull together and really do some amazing presentations down the road. But I know we're all focused on bringing in diversity and inclusion within our chapters and our organizations. So I truly want to thank you for your time today. You mentioned several times in the presentation about your resource. We will be sending out those resource pamphlets probably tomorrow with a link of this webinar, which will be on the St. Louis PRSA YouTube page. So you'll be able to share this. I do challenge each of the viewers to share this link with your company. Share this link with other organizations. They can use this webinar or this video as a way to enlighten others within their organization. So again, I want to thank you for being here on behalf of the St. Louis chapter of PRSA, the Kansas City chapter, Springfield, Missouri chapter, Nebraska, Southeast Wisconsin chapter. Thank you. My name is Chris Cuban. I'm the president of the St. Louis chapter. We hope to see you next week. We do have several more amazing webinars that are planned. Next week, I believe we have one on career goals, setting career goals for professionals. And in the week after, we have how to grow your organization through more business. So hopefully you'll join us on that. So thank you all. Have a great, wonderful rest of the week. And as Nora O'Donnell says, stay positive and test negative. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.